Greetings! My name is Garrick Zoeter and I'm the clarinet professor at the Shenandoah Conservatory in Winchester, Virginia. And I'm here today to help you with the clarinet prepared etude for the Virginia All-State 2018 audition, which is in a few weeks at JMU. So first, I'm going to start by playing the etude for you, and then I will talk about it a little bit and do my best to help you to play it the best you can. Okay, so now you've heard me perform the piece, and now I'd like to talk about some of the challenges you're going to face in this piece, mainly technical ones, and how to overcome them. So make sure that you have the music in front of you as we talk about these things, so that you can refer to the specific place in the music that I'm talking about when we get there, okay? So, measure 1. We have a forte marking. We also have allegretto at quarter note equals 92. So we want to make sure that our sound is as big and full as we can make it, and that our character is somewhat sprightly and buoyant, right? Very kind of playful piece, I think, for the most part this is. When we get to measure 2, we have a choice on the first D flat, whether or not we want to use the right hand D flat or the left hand D flat. I prefer the right hand there. It seems a little bit easier to get to for me, but some of you might prefer the left hand. So you could use either the right hand or the left hand D flat in that measure. However, you do want to make sure that the G flat at the end of measure 1 is played with the middle finger and not with the fork. If you play it with the fork by accident, you will have a lot of trouble getting to the D flat at the beginning of measure 2. So that's tip number 1. Now, when we get to measure 2, you can, the G flats in this measure, of which you find them in beat 3, basically, on beat 3 rather, can be played with the side G flat fingering, or F sharp fingering, right? Our traditional fingering is the first finger here, right? But that note can also be played with F, the thumb, and the bottom 2 side keys. And this is a fingering for G flat that you're going to use a lot in this piece. It comes back over and over again. So if you're unfamiliar with this fingering, you want to make sure to familiarize yourself with it. If you've played your chromatic scales properly in your auditions, then you will be used to using that fingering, because that's the fingering we use when we play our chromatic scales. So, yes, the G flats in that measure 2 can definitely be played this way, and it's a little bit easier than flipping back and forth. Okay? Now let's go on to measure 3. Okay, measure 3, we want to make sure that we pay attention to the articulation markings, right? If you notice, there are groups of 4/16ths that are slurred together, but that always start with a tongue. So you want to make sure that you tongue the beginning of those passages rather than slur them all. I think the tendency for most students will be to want to slur them, and sometimes we do this unconsciously and we don't even realize that we're doing it. So make sure in measure 3 that you listen to that and make sure that you're actually tonguing the beginning of each group of 4. That's very important, okay? And then of course on beat 3 we find our first use of the left hand C, in other words left hand C to E flat. Now at this point I will note that most of the left hand right fingerings that I talk about in this video will refer to a B flat clarinet like this one that does not have the auxiliary E flat A flat lever here. If you have that lever, then some of the suggestions I'm making here will not apply to you, and you can go ahead and use the right hand C or the left hand E flat. However, for the majority of us that doesn't have that key, I will refer to using the left hand C and the right hand E flat. So hopefully that makes sense. Yes? All right, let's go on to measure 4. So in measure 4, we're up in the altissimo register, and we want to make sure that the high E flat is played with the fork E flat fingering here and not the middle finger E flat, right? This is a woefully out of tune fingering, and we want to avoid this wherever we can, yeah? So make sure on that first 16th note in measure 4 that we use the E flat with the fork and with the E flat key here in order to play that in tune, yeah? All right, moving on. Let's look at measure 5. So measure 5 is the first place in this piece where we can use the 1-in-1 B flat. This would be for the first B flat in the measure, right? So rather than using the side B flat, we can use a fingering of 1 in the left hand and 1 in the right hand in order to play that B flat. Why do we do that? Because there's an F immediately after that, and going from this B flat to F is much easier, technically speaking, than going from this B flat to F. This is a little bit more clumsy for most people, so I would suggest using that 1-in-1 fingering there in measure 5. Measure 6. In the 16th note grouping on beat 1, you're going to use the left hand D flat and the right hand C, right? And the reason we do that is to avoid sliding from E flat to D flat. We want to avoid that. So we do E flat, D flat here, and then C here. Yes? Okay, moving on. Measure 7. Yes, okay, this is another place where we want to make sure that that first G flat in the measure is with the middle finger. Again, if we're used to using the fork fingering a lot, then it's very possible that you may turn to that at the beginning of measure 7. The problem with that, however, is that you then cannot get to the E flat very well, or really at all. So make sure that that first G flat in measure 7 is with the middle finger, yes? And then you can get to the E flat with no problem. Okay, what else did I say here? That's correct. And then you will use also again the right hand E flat, right after that going to left hand C, as we spoke about in the measure before. Yeah? Okay, now we come to measure 8. And in this, again, we find the side G flat fingering, right? And that would be for the last beat of the group of 4/16ths in measure 1. So rather than flipping back and forth between G flat or F sharp and F, we're going to use that side G flat F sharp fingering in order to go from G flat to F in a very nice fluid manner. Yeah? Okay. And you will also need to use, this is also very important, coming out of the measure, you need to use the left hand F, because again, you're coming from an A flat before that, and you don't want to slide to this F. So we go A flat to left hand F, and that's for the last 2/8 at the end of measure 8. Okay, everything from then on is pretty straightforward for the most part, yes? We do have this ritardando in measure 10 that we want to stretch out, and you could hear the way I did it in the video. There's of course many different ways to do that, so I leave it up to you to figure out how to do that, but do make sure that you do the ritardando over those last 2 beats of measure 10. Yep. Okay, so the next thing we find is measure 13, where again in the 4th beat, we're going back to that side F sharp G flat fingering rather than flipping back and forth, right? This comes up over and over again in this piece. So that's the last beat of measure 13 played with that side G flat fingering. Measure 14, we do the exact same thing for the G flat on beat 1. Again, I find it easier to do that. I think most clarinets will probably find it easy to do that, so go ahead and use that side G flat for the downbeat of measure 14 as well. Okay, measure 15. Measure 15 is an interesting measure here, and I only mention it because the written G flat on the 3rd beat sounds incorrect to me. And I think it should be a G natural. However, since this is an audition, you want to make sure that you play what's in the music. So, play the written G flat on beat 3 of measure 15 as it is written. Don't play a G natural, otherwise the jury that's used to seeing this G flat here will think that you've played a wrong note. I have a feeling that I think it should be a G natural, but I'll keep that to myself for now. Okay, moving on. Measure 16. So again, the same side G flat. You're going to use that for the 2nd beat of measure 16, the 16ths, right, back and forth, F, G flat. And then in the last run of measure 16, you have to again you're going to go to right hand C, left hand D flat, right hand E flat, and then F on the downbeat of 17 in order to execute that properly. Yes? Okay, so now we come to measure 17, and there are a couple of things to talk about in this measure. The first thing to note is that the E flat, or the written E flat, in the last group of 16ths, so that's beat 4, measure 17, is in fact an E flat. If you notice on the first beat, there's an E natural written. However, the accidentals don't transfer at the octave here in this piece. So that means that that last note in the fourth beat is actually an E flat, not an E natural. Yeah? So make sure you play an E flat there. And also make sure that you play, again, the E flat with the forked fingering like we talked about earlier, not the middle finger. Yeah? Otherwise the pitch will be very bad in that place and you'll have points deducted for that. So make sure that you do D flat, E flat, D flat there to the forked fingering. It's a little bit tricky to do that. Also remember, to make it even harder, that the E flat requires the E flat key to be down, but the D flat does not. So you must go D flat with no E flat key to E flat with the E flat key back to D flat without the E flat key. But in order to keep the pitch consistent and in a good place, you need to do all of that. So this measure 17 is quite tricky because of that. Yeah. You also have the option to use the fork on the beginning of the third group of 16ths. That would be beat 3 of 17. That way you go F to G flat here rather than flipping back and forth, which also can be a little bit cumbersome. So I would suggest using the fork on that beat 3, the first note of beat 3 in measure 17. Okay, again, we go to measure 18. Once again, remember that the E flat is with the forked fingering, not with the middle finger fingering. And then again, we use E flat with the E flat key down. Yes? Okay, where are we going to next? We are going to measure 19. Okay, here again, the first B flat of that measure, measure 19, you can play with the 1 and 1 fingering like we spoke about earlier, because again, there's an F immediately after it. So you go 1 and 1 B flat, right to the F, makes for a nice smooth connection. Yeah? Okay, measure 20. Here again, you're going to use right hand E flat to left hand D flat to right hand C, and you will do that in the group of 16ths on beat 1 of measure 20. So make sure you follow that there. Yep. Measure 21, we're going to again use the middle finger G flat on beat 1 so that we can easily get to the right hand E flat on the first group of 2/16ths. And then we go to left hand C, right, on that second 16th of the group of 2/16ths in measure 21. That's the way to execute that measure. We get to measure 22 and we find the exact same thing on beat 1. Again, right hand E flat, left hand C, right hand D flat, and then to B flat. Yeah? So make sure you do that. As I said, this piece has a lot of pitfalls in it. Now we come to measure 23. Measure 23 is awkward to play, unfortunately, and there aren't too many technical tricks that we can use to get out of the fact that it's difficult. The best advice I can give you is to try to play it slowly, metronomically correctly. Do not try to rush through those measures. 23 and actually 24 also kind of difficult. And also in 23, make sure that you tongue, again, the beginning of each group of 4/16ths. Try not to slur them all together, because it's clearly marked in the music that they should be tongued at the beginning of each grouping. Okay, next we come to really the last measure to talk about in the piece in terms of technical difficulties, and that's measure 24. Measure 24 uses a fingering for B flat that we often forget about as clarinet players, and that is 1 and 2. We've talked about earlier in this presentation about the 1 and 1 fingering for B flat, but B flat can also be played as 1 and 2. Why is this important? Well, when we play it this way on the downbeat of measure 24, we then can go directly to the G flat without any sort of problem, very seamless. Whereas if we play it on the side here, this connection becomes much more cumbersome to do. So play that first B flat in measure 24 with the 1 and 2 fingering, and this is going to help you play that first measure, or that first beat rather, in measure 24 accurately and smoothly. It works wonderfully. And if you're not used to using that fingering, practice it, and practice it a lot so that you can include it as an option the next time you see B flat to G flat, or for instance B flat to F sharp. Yes? Okay, the rest of the piece is pretty much straightforward. And so I will give you one piece of advice based upon my own playing of it. Now I looked at this piece today, learned it today, but I did notice as I worked on it was that because there are so many flats in this piece, that your side keys here, your C sharp D flat, your D sharp E flat, and your second side key here, which is very important for the side F sharp or G flat that we talked about, they are going to fill up with water quite quickly as you practice this piece. So I suggest that when you're at the audition, make sure that you swab out your instrument and give a little time, put some cigarette paper in these 3 tone holes for about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes before you go in to do the audition. This is going to save you from having all the numerous E flats, B flats, all the numerous side G flats, right? All of the D flats played here. That's going to save you from having them fill up with water and either not speak or give you a gurgle when what you really want is clarity. So be careful. There are many flats in this piece, and therefore these 3 keys especially fill up with a lot of water. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful for you all. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You can find my email address via Shenandoah Conservatory. And yeah, I wish you all the best of luck in your preparation and for your audition. Take care.